In one of the bigger moves of the 2024 NBA offseason, Dejounte Murray has landed with the New Orleans Pelicans in a trade with the Atlanta Hawks. While this was a nice win-now move for a team that's looking to find some stability in a turbulent Western Conference, it raises the question as to what their plans are moving forward, particularly with what their vision is in terms of building out the rest of the roster around Zion Williamson. But let's start with the positive. Dejounte Murray immediately comes in and supplements the Frankenstein guard rotation that this Pelicans team ran last season and gives them a legit offensive identity that is not run through CJ McCollum. I'm not sure if there is a causation between being the president of the Players Association and having a poor, inefficient fourth quarter offense, but there is definitely correlation there. The Pelicans had a disastrous late game offense last season, with McCollum playing borderline out of his element as the team's point guard. New Orleans had a record of 0-24 last season in games where they entered the fourth quarter trailing. That's right, the Pelicans had 24 games last season in which they were behind to start the fourth quarter, and they lost every single one of those games. And while McCollum doesn't deserve to shoulder all of the blame for the lack of crunch time offense, I'm looking at you, Brandon Ingram, having CJ be the one in charge of bringing the ball up and initiating your offense isn't exactly where he excels the most. On the other hand, Dejounte Murray is one of just 8 players to score at least 100 points in clutch time in both of the last 2 seasons. Those points came almost strictly off of self-created shots, meaning the Pelicans will have another late game option to go to besides give the ball to Zion and hope no one wants to get in front of him on his way to the rim. And while Dej isn't exactly the most traditional point guard in the league, he's more than capable of making the right pass on the rare occasion when he isn't able to create a shot for himself in a big moment. His two-man game with Zion in late offense situations should be quite effective as long as they can keep enough spacing around that pick-and-roll duo. We can also look forward to Murray complementing what is already a strong defensive unit on the perimeter, highlighted by all-defensive first-team member Herb Jones and the pride of Puerto Rico himself, Jose Alvarado. Dejounte's reputation on the defensive end definitely supersedes his actual production during his time in Atlanta, there's no doubt about that, but there is reason to believe that he can tap back into some of that on-ball disruptiveness that earned himself an all-defensive first-team selection of his own during his time with the Spurs. He's much more of an in-the-lane disruptor than an on-the-ball dynamo, but he's still instinctually a savvy defender that is capable of putting forward that kind of extra effort that this team lacked outside of Alvarado last season. At 6'5", he also adds some needed size to New Orleans' backcourt. For all the credit that Grand Theft Alvarado deserves for his grit and hustle, he's not much taller than your average 5th grade AAU center. And as CJ McCollum continues to progress into his 30s, Murray can help offset some of his deficiencies as well to create a nice backcourt pairing that should fit much more seamlessly than the failed Dejounte experiment in Atlanta. But speaking of size, this trade has now left New Orleans with a gaping hole at the center position. After bringing in Murray's $30 million a year contract, the Pelicans front office was likely reluctant to bring back their starting center Jonas Valanciunas to a big-time deal, and they opted to let him walk in free agency to the Wizards instead. They also had to send out Larry Nance Jr. to make this trade happen, stripping them of their backup center, who helped allow for some versatile lineups despite being undersized for the position. The team has scrambled to alleviate the issue by taking Yves Missi out of Baylor in the first round of the draft, as well as bringing in Daniel Tice on a 2-year deal to man the middle. These are 2 under-the-radar players that should provide New Orleans with more defensive stability than people realize, but it still isn't nearly enough to even tread water in a league that only continues to lean more and more into playing with size, going away from the small ball style of the late 2010s. This is an extremely weak front court when considering some of the lineups that the Pelicans will be seeing on a consistent basis in the Western Conference. We look at Denver, of course, with the pairing of Jokic and Aaron Gordon, who have now finally added a competent backup big in Dario Saric, or OKC, who have reinforced their front line by adding Isaiah Hartenstein to pair with Chet Holmgren. And of course Minnesota, who has the best big man trio in the NBA. Even teams like the Suns, Lakers, Kings, and Rockets, you get the picture. The Pelicans are looking like a team that's going to get absolutely bullied on the low block and on the glass, and there isn't a saving grace left on the free agency market that could anchor this team's defense at the 5. And that's without mentioning the defensive leap that Zion Williamson is still yet to take, having never come close to translating the elite glimpses he displayed during his time with Duke into the NBA. Now, there has been plenty of talk about New Orleans potentially filling that big man gap by shopping Brandon Ingram on the trade market. There are plenty of deals that we can sit and speculate on, but David Griffin in the front office will definitely have to get creative in order to find a suitable package that can land them a legitimate starting center. It would have been nice to have a young exciting prospect like Dyson Daniels to be able to dangle as trade bait, but of course New Orleans needed that in order to land Dejounte Murray in the first place. And after sending out 2 first-rounders in the deal as well, their seemingly endless war chest of draft picks is beginning to run thin besides having control of their own first-rounders moving forward. And without any proof of concept behind a duo of Dejounte and Zion, the front office may not be willing to go all in and start punting away the future to find another immediate win-now upgrade at the 5. So where does this leave the New Orleans Pelicans heading into the 2024-25 NBA season? They'll likely reach the playoffs once again, despite the absolute gauntlet that is the Western Conference, but this team is perhaps no closer to getting out of the first round than they have been in the previous 2 seasons. This was a good value trade for the franchise, but their attempt to solve one problem has now exacerbated other issues with the roster while giving them less future assets to alleviate these issues down the line.